Hey, welcome back to season 2 of Detection at Scale. Today, I'm here with Jason Waits, who is the CISO of Inductive Automation. Hello, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Glad that we finally found time after lots of different scheduling and rescheduling over the last year. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, same.
So take us through a little bit of your background. So how did you get into security and what are you working on right now in Inductive Automation? And tell us a little bit about the company as well.
Sure. So I started in IT. It's kind of like a network admin, running databases, network equipment, servers for a grocery store. Ran their whole backend environment. Started to pivot to security. Ended up coming over here to Inductive Automation about 8 years ago. Eventually became the very first security hire. I think the company's about quintupled since I joined. Basically got to build up the security program and the security team from the ground up. So, my bread and butter was always really focused around like the identity plane and detection response, getting logs, building out response capabilities. And the first pieces I kind of dumped off as I started to hire was more of the corporate security side of things. So for Inductive, I like to say we're the coolest company you've never heard of. We make SCADA software. We got thousands of customers, over 100 countries. I think we're in about 60% of the Fortune 100. So every critical industry you can think of, pharma, nuclear, water, wastewater, HVAC, data centers.
Can you tell us a little bit about SCADA? I'm so unfamiliar with that world. Would love to learn some of the basics from you.
Yeah, so I mean, SCADA, I guess SCADA is probably a subcomponent of OT or operational technology, which is like the bigger picture that comprises the non-IT side of the house, the plant floor, the things that control the elevators, HVAC, power plants, the things that are hooked in and monitoring and alerting. Our software is that layer that would hook into all of that equipment, and you build dashboards, control planes, monitors, alerting.
That sounds pretty important.
Yeah, it's tremendously important. Our customers are pretty much the most critical companies in the world doing all sorts of crazy stuff. The interesting thing too is security is very important in ICS and SCADA, but uptime and resilience and reliability is far more important because those things simply can't go down.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Is there a lot of controls put in place to ensure that like along the supply chain things are secure? I can imagine probably.
For us internally, we try to recognize our place in that supply chain. And so we go hard on security, but our customers as a whole, it's going to completely depend by industry. You're going to have well-funded industries like oil, maybe pharma or tech, the tech sector, but you're going to have stuff like water, wastewater, like local power plants and things that are horribly underfunded. Now, a lot of this stuff has largely been protected by being air-gapped historically. And as everything's starting to converge and these systems are starting, people refer to this as IT, OT convergence. As stuff gets increasingly stuck together, we're starting to see increasing security issues in that area. A lot of it tends to be bread and butter stuff, TeamViewer with weak creds, exposed VPNs, and you have this whole layer that doesn't really have security controls or monitoring in place.
So how has it been making this transition more into an OT environment versus a traditional software company?
I mean, so for us, we are a software company. We aren't OT specifically, but we do have to build software that works in OT. So as a result, we probably have a heavier Windows footprint than a typical modern cloud native software company would have. Might be all MacBooks, all AWS. There's a lot of SCADA software that only works on Windows. So tech support, QA might have to all be Windows. We also have to have a whole stack of PLCs and run our own data center so we can test and make sure that our software correctly works with all this stuff. So it creates kind of a more sprawling environment. We run our own data center. So while we're fairly modern, we still have to run a lot of legacy stuff. And even if it's just for testing purposes, we got to make sure we segment that, monitor that. So we kind of have the worst of all worlds, I would say. So it's a big sprawl given the size.
And have you seen a pretty big evolution of scale? I mean, you said that the team had, doubled over itself a few times since you've been. How did you think about building a program for scale?
I like to say automation's in our name. So we're automation first. So that's really been the root of it. We automate everything we can. We try to never do the same thing twice. We try to embrace these modern principles, infrastructure as code, GitOps, SlackOps. We use a SOAR pretty religiously, and we just automate everything we can just so we can everything we do is with scale in mind. We know if the company's going to double in the next few years again. So we automate everything ever we can. And we really lean on hardened baselines that then every new thing spun up is pre-hardened by default. So we don't have to go back and try to harden it.
So everywhere in security, you're thinking about automation, not just detection.
Yeah, exactly. We try to pre-harden everything, pre-hardened AMIs, infrastructure as code to spin up new accounts in AWS that are pre-hardened to the CIS benchmarks, stuff like that. And then we do a lot of drift detection with our detection engineering work.
Super interesting. Drift detection from like using a CSPM type of tool. Or do you use your own internal tools? Like, do you guys build stuff a lot?
So using, just native stuff like CSPMs or just basic logs from control planes and just tracking drift over time. I like to take more operational alerts, new account created, new server created, pipe that in through maybe a SOAR as kind of an orchestration layer, send that to the person that did it, make them confirm. I think you can get tremendous value out of just keeping an eye on the drift, the changes people are making, the new things that are growing, make people kind of affirm that it was them.
And going back to a lot of the baseline mindset going into this, so automation is in the name. So we automate everything. I love that mentality. Did that inform how you build your team? Did you start with engineering or security engineering, detection engineering?
Yeah, we're never going to have a traditional SOC. We really try to take more of the SOC-less approach where I want to hire a well-seasoned detection engineer that will build a detection and then automate the response to the detection. We're never going to have that tiered model where we have someone responding to an alert that they didn't write. I'd rather just close that gap and really focus on like eliminating toil and building a holistic program where you write the detection, you build the automation to handle it, and you just routinely tune that, keep it humming along.
And the idea is that scales as the data scales, things like that, and you sort of build those best practices from the beginning.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Any learnings from going through this and really starting around automation, really building around automation? Because this is a new mindset for a lot of leaders. And I'm just trying to extract like, what did you run into in that journey?
You have to front load your time a little bit when you're trying to automate something, especially if it doesn't happen a lot. But if the style of thing will occur a lot more in the future, you are sinking a little bit of time into the beginning, but it pays off in the end. You get very familiar with your tools, the data coming out of them, the APIs, and it keeps you focused on building as opposed to just kind of responding to a fire hose of alerts.
Has your team embraced AI for development?
No, I would say we're cautiously optimistic that there will be benefits there. We're definitely doing testing around there. In general, we are very early adopters, especially of like security technology. But on the AI front, I think we're cautiously optimistic. We're definitely dabbling on a couple of things. I think the promise over time of being able to generate, kind of templates to fast track projects or to generate queries without having to master some language can save a lot of time in the end.
Well, you're actually talking to an AI right now. I've AI'd myself. I'm actually doing something else.
That's fantastic. I've often asked marketing to deep fake me into blogs and press releases.
I recently have been doing some like fun little internal projects, and I've been using Claude just to see what it's really about with generating Python code. And oh my God, it's like 10x easier to be a developer now than it was 10 years ago. It's amazing.
Yeah, we've definitely been playing with some of that stuff too, and like Copilot, GitHub Copilot, and things like that. And it's definitely it's a nice way to fast track a project or give you some boilerplate code that you can quickly riff on, and you're off to the races with that. You get over writer's block. Where do I start? You start by quickly fixing something. Oh, that's wrong, and you're off to the races.
Yeah. So going back to automation, what are you looking at to gauge the effectiveness of your automation? Like, what metrics are you tracking? Like, what are you keeping a pulse on to make sure that your program is doing well?
We just try to make sure the detections we build don't trigger too often, that when we see a detection, we're actually interested in that detection. Like, that's a worthy thing to investigate. Whenever something pops up multiple times and it's consistently benign, we look for a way to automate that. We look for like, what was a missing piece that would have made us close that out quicker or that we could automate it away. Then we look to tap into another data source to supply that enrichment. So I think when people think of enrichment, we've got the common cases of like looking up a hash in VirusTotal or looking up an IP on a blacklist, but grabbing the user context and the users groups from your IDP, mapping devices and users together provides a lot of context that's really interesting. Once you see someone's division, the groups are in, it starts to paint a picture of whether they should be doing that thing, if that's normal.
Do you have an example you can step us through? It's super interesting.
there are certain people, certain divisions, certain things that we expect to be spinning up new resources in AWS and doing potentially risky stuff in a raw demo environment. So grabbing certain AWS account IDs and enriching them with the division based on a list, or grabbing the username and just pulling their division, their host name, their location, can kind of paint that story.
But yeah, the threat intelligence lookups and things like that can be really, really helpful. I just wrote a blog also on threat intel, and that really helped me solidify my thinking around the subject. But I love what you said about looking at alerts that are constantly benign and figuring out what the missing piece is and looking at other data sources. Do you find that enrichment is always a post-alert thing or a pre-alert thing or both? And it depends on the tactic. Like, how do you think about it?
I think it's both. I mean, we have some alerts that will pipe into our SOAR, do enrichment, and get delivered to Slack. Whereas other times, we've built our own Slack bots that you can kind of query on demand from Slack. So show me a list of someone's SaaS applications, or show me who owns this device, or show me this user's devices. And so sometimes you see an alert, and then you can quickly from Slack run a couple commands, spit out a couple like kind of ad hoc little pieces of things that would have had that extra context. So it really depends.
And then are you doing most of the triage in Slack too? I mean, you just mentioned one use case of running follow-up commands, but so all the alerts are there, the context gathering, all the decision making, is that the idea?
Exactly. We were actually doing a tremendous amount of triage straight from Slack. We use application control software, which, so that only pre-approved applications can run on the vast majority of the fleet. Any blocks go straight to Slack with the ability for us to pivot to VirusTotal, one-click approve based on cert path, generate a kind of a code to allow someone to install stuff for 15 minutes, spit out, but we'll receive a report right after that of what they installed. Same thing, DNS blocks, phishing emails, all straight to Slack with the ability to block, unblock, add to a global allow list straight from Slack.
That's very cool. So you talked a little bit about automation, inference code, GitOps, like these types of things. We didn't really talk about the data layer at all. So are you all taking and embracing a data lake approach? Is it early days? Like, talk to us a little bit about the data side. What's your approach there?
I guess we've been using kind of a data lake approach. For now, we're centralizing most data in our SIEM, storing there for a year, and trying to build as much automation on top of that as we can. But for some data sources might be harder to get in there, especially if it's a little more novel, a new startup, and we don't want to build a parser. We might keep that data separate and just pipe that straight through our SOAR as well.
Interesting. Are you a believer of centralization? I mean, I had a conversation with Anton Chavakin about it. Do you think that the world is going to a more decentralized place, or centralized is going to still be the way?
I think there's a lot of convenience and benefits to centralizing the data, but I do think we're moving towards a more decentralized model. I think moving data from cloud to cloud just creates a lot of work on the back end, keeping that data flowing. I think having a model or a system that can query data, regardless of where it is, and run detections over it in different formats is definitely a more beneficial long-term thing. I think it's just going to become a necessity. It's really going to depend on the company, but I straddle cloud and our own data center. So I'm already fighting multiple data types. It's already a pain. Add in more clouds, more geolocations, more data centers, different business units, it starts to get painful. So, we use our SOAR as kind of a normalization layer so that if everything pipes through there, we can make the alerts look the same. We can do enrichment in the exact same way, even if stuff's coming from different locations.
Super interesting. How do you decide a data set that's worth onboarding, typically?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we try to take everything we can, and then it's really important to us to make sure we build detections for it. So we have a data set that we can't think of any detections for. There's not any day-to-day value. We might be inclined to drop that. It's tough because some data sets are great for real-time detection and alerting, and others are great for historical investigations. And that's where we might store something like maybe like VPC flow logs in a separate, like in more of an NDR tool, because day to day, it's hard to get a really high fidelity detection straight off of like an IP address in a VPC flow log. But as soon as you do an investigation, it's really interesting to understand who someone was talking to post compromise.
What's the opposite of that? Like, what are good data sets for real time, you think?
We're big fans of like EDR logs, IDP logs, CloudTrail, GuardDuty. CloudTrail can be extremely noisy though, so trying to baseline that is a pain.
Yeah. Speaking of baselining, sounds like a nice transition into ML and AI. So obviously with with a lot of the amazing advances we've had in models, large language models the last year, have you started embracing using them? We talked about it for coding, but how about for things like natural language and more like DNR use cases? Anything cooking there? Anything that you're following that you're interested in?
I definitely like the idea of using generative AI to abstract away query language, make it really quick to get answers from the data without, especially when if you ever hire people that are more junior, or even if they're senior, but they come from a completely different tool set, you can get operationalized far quicker if you're just asking kind of a real question. So I think that's definitely a great use case. We started to dabble around that. We're not really using it for baselining, but I definitely think that's a really cool use case. There's so much of what we do is show me the new, show me the novel, show me the drift. So being able to detect those changes or filter out things that have happened a million times before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of using natural language for querying and for doing like subsequent querying as well. I think that's a really cool use case for NLP. There's a lot of really amazing use cases for it. I think it's going to up-level us quite a bit.
Yeah, you really get to focus on asking the right questions and not like how you're going to ask the question, and one syntax, you forget one flag and maybe you get the wrong answer.
Yeah, it's definitely finicky. I mean, people just have to understand how to use the tech, right? Things like vector databases and just models in general have really changed the game for what's possible and how we think about machine learning in a more traditional sense. I'm very bullish. I'm very excited.
Yeah, everything's very service level. I do agree. I think long term it's going to be fantastic. I just think everyone's jumping on and they're doing like the minimum viable thing to say they have AI in their product. And then you watch the demo and you're like, that's just so minuscule. Won't move the needle yet.
Yeah, well, we haven't quite cracked the code for predicting human behavior yet. So whenever that model's out and trained, if Facebook's listening to this right now, please build a foundation model on human behavior in technology. That'd be great. Thank you.
I would subscribe to that.
It's crazy how much those models cost to train too. I don't know if you've been following that, but like it's just getting bigger and bigger. It's ridiculous, like multiple hundreds of millions of dollars to train certain foundation models. It's insane.
Yeah, I'm not following that piece super closely, but it does, from some of the numbers and the things I've seen, it feels unsustainable. But
it's actually getting cheaper. Like to do certain model sizes and context windows and things like that, like the price to train is going down. We're just training on huge, bigger data sets now. They looked a few years back and they were like, okay, it cost us $100 million to train the model then. Now it costs us $5 million. It's like, whoops. Or, hey, we learned a lot along the way. Let's use that going forward. But I'd recommend, honestly, anyone listening and people in InfoSec in general, just really stay current on it. I think there's so many interesting pieces of tech coming out with like vector databases and obviously the foundation models and open source community for foundation models is super interesting too. So as it sort of permeates through InfoSec, we'll start to see like some pretty cool use cases that make our lives easier, especially when it comes to automation, right? Like do a sentiment analysis on, these behaviors or this message that someone sent back to me, these types of things that were hard and not deterministic before. Cool. Jason, I guess some of the final questions, I'm always really curious on folks' wisdom over many years. You've been at Inductive for quite a long time. You've built a really amazing team from how you describe it, automation first, thinking about scaling and supporting the company through time. I think that's a really great foundation that you've created there. So curious, what are 3 pieces of advice that you can give other folks listening in who want to build the same type of SOC-less team?
Yeah, I guess I would say dive in, find your biggest pain points, pull your team and find the biggest, areas of toil and find out how you can automate them. There's a lot of ROI there. And there's a lot of things you might not think you can automate that you can. Stay up on things. I mean, I do love this podcast. And I also love the Detection Engineering Weekly newsletter out there. These are my 2 favorite resources every week just to stay up on the detection response trends. And at 3, I would say one of my biggest wins over the years is maintaining really tight relationships with engineering across the org, because in any incident, we always rope them in immediately. So we have dedicated subject matter experts who know their systems better than we do in the middle of an incident, on day one. It's really helpful. Lets us, really shorten the investigations and get context that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get.
Great pieces of advice. Really appreciate you coming on today, Jason. It's awesome talking with you. I learned a lot from hearing your mindset around building teams, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.